There's a career move most professionals don't consider during a job search, and it can change everything. Board service. In Wanted, a board career, award-winning executive coach Marlo Lyons shows how professionals can pursue board roles to build credibility, expand influence, and create real career momentum, even without a C-suite title. Whether you're in transition or planning your next chapter, this book offers a smarter, more strategic path forward. Wanted, a board career, is available now. Find the link in the show notes.
Trust can be the continuity that helps us actually move through change and transition together and help us navigate disruption together.
And what trust does is provide that bit of stability in all the uncertainty, in all the ambiguity, in all the upheaval and the chaos and the complexity.
You've probably heard the phrase, trust is everything at work. But what I've noticed is that most people don't actually know what that means or how to build it consistently. And even more importantly, they don't know how to rebuild it once it's broken. See, trust tends to break in small ways over time, often without anyone realizing it. Today, I'm joined by Michelle and Dennis Reina, who have literally pioneered the study and practice of trust in the workplace. They break down trust into 3 dimensions: character, communication, and capability. We talk about what it really takes to rebuild it, especially in today's complex, often remote workplaces. So if you're leading a team, working cross-functionally, or just trying to navigate relationships at work a little more effectively, this conversation will give you the language and practical tools you need to move forward. Let's get into it. Michelle and Dennis, welcome to Work Unscripted.
Hi, Marlo. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, we're so honored to be here today with you.
I am so happy to have you because I have actually read all of your books, including the newest book, The Art of Trust Building, which I have right here. And I've read them all, and I started reading your books because I had to deeply understand trust because I was working with teams. And we all know team conflict is 99% about lost trust. And so it's not uncommon. And I know that people listening at work right now probably have somebody that they have a trust issue with. So you guys, it's so interesting to me that you guys are researchers of trust and you've been doing this for 30 years. What happened in your work or lives that made this become the thing that you were going to study for decades?
Well, it actually started over 50 years ago, Marlo, on the Great Walls of Yosemite National Park. And at the time, I was running the Mountaineering Center. And when you're 2,000 feet up in the air and you have your belayer online, you realize at a very visceral kinesthetic the importance of trust, that I had his life in my hands and vice versa. And from that point, from a very visceral kinesthetic level, I understood the importance, but I wanted to understand how we actually build trust and how it breaks down and how to rebuild trust. And that brought me back forward about 20 years later. And I started graduate school, actually met my wife there on the dance floor and fell in love. And we've been dancing together ever since.
And trusting each other, I presume.
Yes, but Marlo, the other part, I love the question, what brought us here? It was actually our clients.
Yes.
It was people. It was teams. It was leaders, asking us to help them understand why people were struggling to do their best work, why highly talented people were having a hard time collaborating with one another, what was contributing to silos going up rather than silos going down, and why was it that change initiatives were stalling out? It's interesting. These were the kinds of things that people, team members and leaders talked with us years and years and years ago. But gosh, they're the same kinds of things people are talking about today.
Hey.
So
Same thing.
we had to go to work to understand what their challenges were, because they would tell us, we don't trust one another. There isn't trust in this team. We're not sure we can trust our leaders. But when we go back many, many years ago, Marlo, there was really very little available to any of us in the leadership development, training and development space. There was a huge gap. We all knew that the need for trust was there, but there was a gap. What does it mean? How do you build it? How do you keep it? So Dennis and I went to work to fill that gap. And what we gave birth to was our life's work.
And that was about 35 years ago.
Wow. And what I'm hearing you say when you talk about filling that gap, like this is really about building trust at scale and rebuilding trust at scale, and not just in the office, right? But building trust with clients, building trust with remote teams, building trust with customers, because building trust really becomes essential for survival, I would say, in everything we do, especially in the workplace.
Survival as well as thriving, and the other part of it that is so profound is, while we tend to focus on the workplace, where does everybody go? Is home. Everybody goes home. But, in the workplaces where we have the greatest access, to support and serve each and every day. But trust can be the continuity that helps us actually move through change and transition together and help us navigate disruption together. And now, oh my goodness gracious, there is a deeper hunger and need for it than there ever has been, because it's all about people, human relationship and connection, which drives how everything gets done or not.
And what trust does is provide that bit of stability in all the uncertainty, in all the ambiguity, in all the upheaval and the chaos and the complexity.
Absolutely. And you're right. Like trust is really the foundation, right? It's the foundation of everything we do, whether it's strategy or change management or whatever it is we're doing in the office. I want to dig in really deep, and I want to give people some really a deep understanding of what trust is. And you say it's not actually one thing, it's three things. It's contractual trust, it's, which is character, communication trust, and then you also talk about this competence trust. So we're going to dive deep today, because I want people to really understand that it is not just, oh, please trust me, which I think, or, oh, I'm going to be nice and therefore somebody's going to trust me. Like there are three very distinct things you need to understand. So let's dive into contractual trust first, which is the trust of character. What does that mean, the trust of character?
So, and thank you so much for kind of laying that out, Marlo, the three dimensions. You trust a character is, simplistically put, we do what we say we're going to do.
We deliver as promised. We honor our agreements.
And we become viewed as the person people can rely on and depend upon, do what we say we will do, honor our agreements. But a core facet of that trust of character is that we really look out for the highest, best interest of one another. Yes, we do have needs, but we earn trust of character when we also give as much attention to what other people need and what other people's interests are, rather than a singular focus on our own. And the consistency of how we show up, the consistency of our attitude and our outlook contributes to trust of character in our own individual relationships, but in our team relationships.
That is a huge point, because I think so often we are so concerned of, I need this, I need to get this done, I have to move through this, I have to get this off my plate. And we're not thinking that the other person might need time, or they might need processing time, or they might need something completely different than what you need. So I just want to emphasize that piece, that it's the expectation setting, right? Between two people of what you expect of each other.
And what, I may expect something from somebody, but what might they need from me to support them?
And in order to deliver for you.
Or what might they need from others that any of us can help and enable? That whole aspect of support, how we can help each other, what might be needed. is just so extraordinary in those team and workplace relationships, especially when, the ground is shaking. The one thing that people can come to rely on and depend on is, I'm not alone. I'm not alone. Well, at times I may feel alone. I'm not alone. I do have people I can turn to. I do know my leader and my coworkers do care. I do know that becomes, as Dennis is saying, that source of stability and continuity when we all feel a certain stress and strain.
And what trust to character really does is provide that starting point. It is foundational, as you said, to all relationships, whether it be at work or at home. And, whether you're talking about managing expectations or establishing boundaries and the parameters of roles and responsibilities, to keeping agreements and, supporting one another.
And also setting boundaries, right? Setting boundaries as well.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. How do boundaries come into play? Because I think so often we're scared to set boundaries. We're afraid somebody's going to either violate the boundary or not adhere to the boundary or not respect our boundary. How does that come into play with this?
Well, what's important is that the boundaries actually, and we define them as permeable or semi-permeable, in that boundaries are defined areas of roles or responsibilities, for example.
And needs.
And needs. And this is my playing field, if you will, and that's your playing field. But, at times we need to cross over. At times we need to support one another. At times we need something from each other. And so those will be permeable.
And also those, those other facets, Marlo, that, we find increasingly are coming into the workplace, especially, in virtual organizations and people working across time zones in the globe, is, we do have broader lives. We do have a home. We do have family. We have friends. We have communities. And so there are those boundaries and parameters that can be established together that help us do our best work, but also look out for the best interest of one another. We may have a work member who's not really able to start until 9 a.m., but they're on Pacific time and somebody else is on Eastern time, or somebody else is in Europe, or they're in China. It's allowing us to look at one another as the full human being and creating that space. That's what trust of character does. It gives those behaviors and it gives the language inherent through all three dimensions. There's language and there's behavior, and it becomes that reference point. Because Marlo, you asked a great question. Well, how do we establish those boundaries? What Dennis and I have found is having the trust of character as a language, having those behaviors equips that understanding that we can really have a conversation about how we're going to practice these behaviors together. That gives everybody that starting point to really work in the best interest of each other.
The second parameter here is the communication trust, which is really about disclosure and transparency. So how do you build that, the communication trust in the workplace?
Well, for example, one of the key behaviors is sharing information. For example, going through change and transition, a leader might sit down with their people and say, hey, look, I'm going to share with you what I know and what I can share with you, and withhold what I can't, rather than just the silence. Silence is the killer because people will make stuff up. Right. And it's rarely positive, and it's rarely, true. So sharing information is key. Telling the truth. Mm-hmm. Hey, I made a mistake, or I blew it. Admitting mistakes is another.
And telling the truth about our thoughts, our points of view, our opinions,
our
intentions. Quite often it may be a little bit easier to tell the truth about the status on a timeline. It may be a little bit easier to tell the truth about something that's very tangible and concrete. But trust of communication, through that transparency and honesty, is also telling the truth about, how I really view something versus a comfortable, variation of the truth, or telling somebody the truth that we think they want to hear versus the real truth about how I see it or where I'm at, or how I think or how I feel. Is such an incredible building block. The thing about the dimensions of the behaviors, they're working in hand, because another very significant way that people can build trust of communication is when we have an issue, which we're going to, when we have concerns, which we will have.
Yes, we will.
We will.
You can guarantee that.
Guarantee that we are going to have issues. We are going to have concerns. We are going to have wonderments. There are going to be stresses and strains. But, we can use them to strengthen trust when we, with grace, with compassion and positive intent, we put them on the table. And we go to work on them together. And what doesn't build trust of communication is when we take our issues and concerns and we feed the grapevine.
Oh, yeah.
We feed the rumor mill. We talk to everybody else rather than the people we really need to talk with.
Right. And that, of course, is speaking with good purpose, right? We go directly to the individuals involved versus everybody else, which is, of course, gossip and backbiting.
Which we see so often in the workplace, right? And you alluded to this a little bit earlier, Dennis, about the emotional reasoning, right? When somebody does not speak their mind or does not explain intent or does not communicate well, and there are a lot of bad communicators out there, we emotionally reason and we start filling in the holes with what we think it could be. And I can't
the worst,
tell you how,
and often the worst.
Yeah, and I can't tell you how many times I hear my leaders say that I work with, so-and-so hates me. So-and-so hates me. That's what they say.
Yeah.
And when we break it down, it's not that there's hate. It's that they're missing one of these dimensions is what it boils down to each time.
Right.
And then we work on that dimension, right? But that's the thing is we fill it in, right? So-and-so hates me. They're doing this because they're passive aggressive or because they're just mean or I don't know why. And look, I am just as guilty as the next one. I have done this. I know I have. And I can visually remember me doing this with some of my bosses. And so that's why this is so important because if you have all these three dimensions, and we're going to jump into the third one in a second, I think that's where you're building that trust so that a lot of that emotional reasoning goes away.
Well, I think what's also happening, Marlo, and by the way, I'm 100% with you. We all slip into that, because when trust is shaky, we all feel vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, we can actually assume the worst. And oh my goodness, we can become so masterful in making up stories and conjecturing about things that are most likely the farthest from the truth. But there's something that is at play in this dialogue that I'm loving, that I'd love us to make very visible to the people who are listening, is we're talking about awareness here.
Yes.
It's a powerful aspect of the three dimensions that Dennis and I, one of the primary purposes that fueled us, because the three dimensions come from years of significant research that we've conducted. And what we aimed for was providing a framework that really helps people grow in their awareness and help to have an understanding and a language so we can have these kinds of conversations with one another. Because the aspect about awareness is the more aware we are, guess what? We have choice. We have choice. We can catch ourselves, as you say, about the assumptions that we're making that can help us to check it out. Is this true? Are real building blocks for building a sustaining trust.
And another key aspect of trust of communication is giving and receiving feedback.
And asking for it.
And asking for it, not just giving it, and you're going to have to, can I give you some feedback? No,
right.
It's about,
so uncomfortable,
hey,
right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's like, how am I doing here? What's working? What's not? What's getting in the way? What do you need from me? What do I need from you? Et cetera, et cetera. So it becomes a dialogue. It becomes a conversation, just like we're having here today. And rather than this thing called, I'm going to give you feedback.
It's a connector.
Yeah, absolutely, it is. Let's jump to the third prong, I would call it, of trust, which is the competence trust, which is capability. And that's how you actually do the job, right? And how you do it well. But it's not just the job, right? It's also respecting other people's capabilities, which is where I always find the conflict of John over here is not doing his job, right? Or Steve over here doesn't know what he's doing. And what I have found many times, I love that you use the word language, is that when you dig into that, you find out, oh, wait, they might have the same title, but they have a different remit, or they have a different understanding of what their job is from their leadership. And I have seen that too often. So can you give me an example, or can you help me understand what this competence trust is? A little bit of both.
It's, the trust of capability. It is, as you say, is, respecting and honoring one another's skills and abilities. And one of the most powerful ways we can do that is use them.
Yes.
Leverage them. And leveraging them, meaning, giving opportunities, involving them, providing, feedback, as we say, giving opportunities for growth and development. Sometimes we all have a tendency to look at skills and abilities in a very concrete way. Knowledge, expertise, tangible skills that I can use every day. There are other skills that come at play in the human dimensions that we're talking about. What we've been discussing within, trust of character and trust of communication are behavioral skills. And what we, and I know you and your practice in serving clients, do is help people learn those skills. Well, people who are working together can help one another grow and apply those skills.
Well, and because trust is reciprocal, you got to give it to get it. The three dimensions, well, first of all, the trust of capability, there's acknowledge and leverage the skills of one another in service to our customers and our clients. And then allow and empower people to make decisions, okay? Rather than just controlling, empowering people to make those decisions. And then, of course, involving others in seeking their input and helping them learn and grow. So those are those four key behaviors under trust of capability.
And
Marlo,
that's
you were going to say
alignment.
something.
Yeah, that's stakeholder alignment, right? Stakeholder management. But also, what I find and what I'm hearing out there just from clients is that people get very get their backs up against the wall, right? When, oh, geez, somebody sent me something, that's not your job. This person's overlapping my team's work. Is that a lack of trust? Is that, because that's a mindset of somebody that's not like, why is this person sending me this? Oh, I asked that question and they're being kind and giving me maybe extra information or something like that. There's just a lot of immediate, what I call this immediate triggers, right? These immediate jump on people. And is that a trust thing that we're missing?
It's definitely a trust ingredient. There's an aspect of trust. It's am I trusting the intentions of that? Am I trusting the reason why that information is being provided? There's also a vulnerability, Marlo, in there. Am I losing some ground here? Am I losing a place or a stance that I have? So that takes us to the deepest level of trust, which is our trust in ourselves. Is my role being infringed upon? Is my lane being usurped? Are those deeper places that we can all go, which, yes, there's maybe something at play in terms of how am I trusting that person's intention, but also how am I trusting myself in this equation?
And in this situation
is another facet, because there's vulnerability. When we start saying these very strong things in the way that you're modeling, which I love, underlying that, there is vulnerability.
Yeah.
There's fear that's at play.
How do I trust myself and trust and this is in your new book, about the trusting of yourself and how important that is. Why is it so important? And then how do we do that and believe in ourselves and listen to our gut and all of those things that come with it?
Well, trusting in ourselves is the essential ingredient because it's where it all begins.
Yes.
Our relationships with other people actually begin with the relationship we have with ourselves. The degree to which we perceive that we can actually trust in ourselves, that we can rely on ourselves, that we can actually depend on ourselves to be that source to steady our own ship. Yet at the same time, because we are human beings and we are constantly evolving and growing and being provided with new situations and new circumstances, there are times when we're not going to be as trusting of ourselves. That often comes when we're in uncharted territory. That's when we really want to harness those three dimensions of trust as our barometer and our roadmap, because that's what helps us ask for support. It's what helps us lean on other people. It's what helps us fuel collaboration, and our own trust in ourselves helps us to know that we may feel a little bit vulnerable right now, but we can get there. We're not alone. When we're not aware, it becomes a little bit tricky because when we're not as trusting of ourselves and we're not as aware, it's when we can be more judgmental. We can point the finger. Why are they sending me those emails? Why are they stepping on my territory? Oh my God, are they out to get me? It's a dance. My relationship and how I show up, as you mentioned, my attitude and my outlook begins right here with me.
And
My
our
trust in
intentions.
myself. And the facet about that's so important is that is the part that influences every step we take with others, every conversation we have with others, it's our point of entree into our relationships with other people and the way we step into the world.
And whether we're talking about trusting ourselves or talking about trusting one another or others, all three of those dimensions come into play. All three of those work hand in hand and they're integrated. So often people say, well, can you have one without the other? Yes, but not for long. And unless you are strengthening all three and working them together, then there will be a trust breakdown someplace, somewhere, somehow.
And in fact, you've written that book as well, Trust and Betrayal in the Workplace, because that is the first book that I read of yours, which was so helpful when I was working with teams that, I remember 10 people that just could not get along. They could not get along and they couldn't get the work done because they couldn't get along. And I remember reading through the betrayal. So betrayal is a big thing. And betrayal is a very strong word. It's a very strong word, right? That somebody intentionally betrayed you. What's the most common betrayal that people experience at work that you've seen?
Most likely people overpromising but under-delivering. Okay. They say, oh, I'm going to provide X, Y, and Z, and they deliver barely X.
Inconsistency.
So it's inconsistency in their behavior, which is trust of character, starting point there. But all three of those come into play because they communicate that in some way, shape, or form, and they either deliver or not as promised.
I think that, the dance you've been having around information, well, we've talked about where it may feel vulnerable if somebody perceives that somebody's crossing over. But, the failure to share information goes a long way in causing trust to break down. Telling people what we think they want to hear rather than really speaking our truth, being left out of a decision, being excluded from something, feeling micromanaged and held back from opportunities, expectations that are not realistic, as Dennis mentioned, agreements that are not kept, boundaries and needs that are overlooked, experiencing that people are asking and asking and asking and taking and taking and taking from me, yet what I need is overlooked. The aspect about betrayal is it is a big word. Yet, what's most important that we all understand is the vast majority, over 90% of the behavior that causes trust to break down is unintentional. It's unintentional.
It's minor and
It's minor.
unintentional.
And in a particular moment, when we experience somebody failing to deliver, the slippage of information, forgetting to keep me in the loop, we may view each and every incident with innocence because we're unaware. And as people, we are most prone to really extend grace and give that benefit of the doubt, or we're going to keep going. Yet when those small, minor, unintentional lapse build, and
It builds.
continue to
Yep.
grow, the impact takes the shape and form of betrayal.
I call that the green glass of muck, right? The first one
I love
happens
that.
and the glass gets a little green with muck, right? And then the next one
Oh,
happens
yeah.
and it gets greener and darker until you can't see through it. You look at everything through that green glass of muck is what I call
And
it.
it's an energy field, because
Yeah.
trust is energy producing. The glass is clean and clear and
Yeah.
sparkles. We can just see
The
everything.
transparency,
Um,
everything's there. Yep.
Yes. We see the brightness, the lightness. I mean, that's the energy and the vibrancy of trust. But when it becomes vulnerable, energy contracts. And I love that. The glass gets, it's murky and it grows and we're slogging through. And that's where we begin to question and doubt ourselves and question and doubt other people. And it just, what Dennis and I find is that, people really, really withdraw and energy really does become depleted and contracted. And what we call it is, the green muck. I love that. It's the shadow of
The shadow.
trust. It's the shadow. And it can hang on for a good long time.
And I want to
Yes,
go
it can.
back to the word betrayal because that didn't originate with us. In fact, in our original, about 3 decades ago, when we started really studying this thing called trust, we asked, people not only what their experience and what trust meant to them, and inevitably, 90 to 95% of them told us about how trust was eroded, broken down, or breached, and they were the ones, our
We used the word.
research
Our
clients were the ones who used the word betrayal,
I mean, clearly the word betrayal is in the encyclopedia, but how it comes into the equation
Yeah.
of trust-related dynamic. I mean, we learn from our clients. It's as Dennis is saying, when we sit and ask people about their experiences related to trust, honestly, they often lead with where it's been broken and the betrayal.
And that's why it's such a powerful word, because it's how deeply people feel about the decisions being made in organizations. Let's face it, where do we spend most of our waking hours, right? Usually at work,
At work.
versus at home with our those whom we live and love, right?
With our
And
pets who never betray our trust.
right, exactly. But it's how deeply they feel about
Right.
those decisions, and that's critical.
And most leaders, when they do make that mistake, Dennis, when most leaders make a mistake, they just say, "All right, well, you have to trust me again." They don't say it out loud, but they just expect that to just disappear. And they may apologize, and they've moved on, but the employee hasn't moved on, and they start looking through that green glass of muck again. Because rebuilding trust is not a one-off of, "Gee, I apologize," and we all move on. It's a process, right?
Absolutely. It's a process, and it's a consistent action, consistent behavior over time, again and again, as in delivering as promised, or keeping your word, or, speaking the truth, or admitting mistakes, whatever. Those are the behaviors that build trust. But it's one simple apology is not going to rebuild trust. Trust can be built over years, but it can be broken in an instant. And that's what's key is the rebuilding and the rebuilding process starts with acknowledging what's so.
Mhm. rather than justifying it. I'm sorry.
Acknowledge
Yeah.
and the impact on that breach or betrayal and so forth on the individuals involved, and allowing feelings to surface and managing those as well. But we all have feelings about decisions, whether it be at home or at work,
or the breach of trust. Trust is emotionally provocative. It is. It's that energy field. We can't see it, we can't touch it, but we can feel it.
Yeah.
And it is emotionally provocative, both into the positive, where we feel inspired and confident, and we want to join, we want to connect, we're ready to go. We have all these feelings of appreciation and gratitude, and then we can have feelings and emotions of hurt and disappointment and letdown and frustration and anger. I loved your scenario, because one of the biggest mistakes that leaders make is they rationalize the breach of trust and they expect everybody to let go and move on. Well, we really can't. We do have to observe and acknowledge what happened. This may be a 5-minute conversation, or it might require a bit more of a sit down or a number of sit downs. But when we ignore it and we override it, all we do is invite it to fester. That's all we do. We invite it to stay on our doorstep and in our relationships, in our meetings. And that's why often, we may hear people talk about a breach of trust as if it happened yesterday. But when we listen a little bit more clearly, it may have happened 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, but it's been lingering because we've never worked it through and healed.
And that's key. Time does not heal wounds. It may bury them, but it won't. And so without us actively doing our inner work and our outer work, to work it through. So observe and acknowledge what's happened and allow those feelings to surface, and then getting in or giving support depending upon the situation. You were going to say something, Marlo.
Yeah, no, I love that you said that it was emotional, because the book really focuses on that it's behavioral, which I thought was so interesting as a big insight, right? That trust is behavioral. It's what we do behaviorally, but it hits us so emotionally.
Yes.
And now you have this work that is so complex today. We have tighter margins. We have remote work. People are rarely seeing each other in person in some situations. How is that changing, and impacting trust in the workplace today more so than ever before?
It's inviting it to have greater attention and intention.
Yes.
We have to work really hard to create those spaces of connectivity. We have to work really hard to understand the landscape, the individual landscape that each person is living and working within, but also the broader landscape that we all share. This whole aspect of observing and acknowledging when trust is at play is application here.
Right.
Just having the transparent, open conversation with one another, observing and acknowledging that there's a lot at play here right now, and we're not seeing one another, and we don't know when we're going to have a chance to see one another. And I feel the stress and the strain. How can we support one another? It opens the door for reframing. How can we bring into this equation that we're living right now? What we most need is understanding and support and doing our work, and how we're going to do our work together, because we all can take responsibility for our thoughts, for our outlook, the steps we're choosing to take, the words we're choosing to use, the assumptions we're choosing to hold and carry versus testing. I mean, myself, I've had some sacred, precious relationships with leaders I've had the privilege to support that I have never been in the same room with. When we consider there is an energy field that is at play, and it crosses everything. So what we find is we just have to give it more attention and intention and work at it.
Well, and the need to communicate is paramount.
Yeah.
I mean, communication, whether it be remote workers or, distant, geographically dispersed, however you want to speak about it, the need for communication is ever so much greater. And so that's key. So we have said, observe, acknowledge what's happened, allow feelings surface, get support, reframe the experience, because what are the options? What are the choices? And, what are the opportunities I now have given what has happened? And then taking responsibility, as Michelle had mentioned, what's mine to own and what's not mine to own. Okay. And moving forward, forgiving first and foremost ourselves, and so often that's the hardest to forgive, and then possibly forgiving others. But what's absolutely key is you may not forgive, but you don't want to forget the lessons learned. Absolutely. The lessons learned in order to be able to let go and move on. So observe and acknowledge what's happened, allow feelings to surface, give and get support, reframe the experience, take responsibility, forgive yourselves and others, let go and move on. And depending upon the impact and the intent and the immensity of the breach, you might cycle through those, or you might cycle through them again and again, or you might slide back. You think you're on taking responsibility, and a song comes on the radio and reminds you, oh my God,
I remember when that happened. Exactly.
Yes, exactly. And, say, oh, I guess I'm still in allowing feelings to surface, or you're cycling through again and again. Yeah. So sometimes it's 2 words or 3 words. I'm sorry. Others, it could be a lifetime of working through the issues and the concerns.
Or what happened.
That is a fantastic way to wrap up. The new book is called The Art of Trust Building, Transform Lives, Teams, and Organizations. But the previous books, I must say, are just as good. You have Trust and Betrayal in the Workplace and Rebuilding Trust in the Workplace. There really is a book for everyone, quite frankly. And I will say that I have the book at home, the new book. I used it yesterday with a client, literally yesterday, in discussing how to build trust with certain other cross-functional stakeholders. It is powerful. It's a very easy read, which is what I love. It's not this big complex. Yes, you're researchers, but it is an easy read. It is easy to put the steps into action. Thank you so much for being here, Michelle, Dennis. This has been an enlightening conversation. I hope people will pick up the book, but also, of course, forward this podcast to others who need to rebuild trust in the workplace, because unfortunately, I think it's just, there's so much conflict today, and it just doesn't have to be that way.
No, it doesn't have to be. Not. And thank you so much. Thank you, Marlo.
Thank you for being here. This is one of those conversations that I hope you don't just listen to. I hope you find a way to apply these trust-building techniques in your life. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone you work with. These are conversations teams should be having together. And if you want to go deeper, I highly recommend checking out Michelle and Dennis's work and their assessment tool. I've included the link in the show notes. As always, thank you for being here. Stay curious, stay growing, and stay unscripted. The journey is yours. Work Unscripted is produced and edited in partnership with the team at Palm Tree Podco and 21 Digby. The content for this week's episode was created by me, Marlo Lyons.